Rob, would you introduce yourself to the board, please? And though it's probably not necessary, go ahead and spell your name for our reporter.
Rob Sanders. It's R-O-B as in boy, S-A-N-D-E-R-S.
How long were you a police officer with the Columbia Police Department?
Right at 18 years.
Was that your first law enforcement experience?
It was my first permanent position. I had been a reserve officer for approximately 6 months prior to getting hired with Columbia PD.
And what was your initial law enforcement training?
I had went through a basic 120 down in the Cape Girardeau area while I was finishing up my degree in criminal justice. It was a basic 120, which was all that was necessary at the time. And then I had put myself through an additional 130-hour advanced academy because we knew the standards were going to be raising. So I went ahead and did that while I was down and finished up my degree again.
And have you been or were you a patrol officer at Columbia PD for your entire tenure there?
Yes.
And at the time you were fired, how far were you from being fully vested in retention?
2 years.
Where did you learn your use of force training?
From continuing education throughout the police department, from our instructors there that put us through maintenance training, basically, through documents that were handed out, through my patrol manual that's been referenced today, through watching others and learning their experiences, through my training officers and their experiences, basically just day in and day out doing my job over 18 years.
From your supervisors also?
Correct.
And formal training, formal use of force training?
Yes.
So let's go ahead and turn to August the 15th, 2011. Tell me what you remember about how you ended up at Kenneth Baker's residence.
Approximately a year before that, I had been assigned to be a canine officer with the department. And at that time, I had just come back from vacation. I had some canine logs to catch up on. So I was sitting in report writing when I heard the open mic and the emergency assistance call summoning other officers to help what I believed at the time to be 3 officers in a fight with someone.
Now you mentioned an open mic. Describe that for us, please.
When an officer has a microphone on, they can either have a lapel mic, which has been described here, or they can have a radio that's in their holster on the side of their belt, usually opposite of their firearm. If either the button on the lapel is pushed or the button on the radio itself is pushed and held open, you can hear sometimes quite well, for instance in this case, quite well that there's a fight going on. Sometimes you can hear verbal commands, you can hear a lot about what's going on through that open mic.
And what did you hear?
I heard that there was quite a fight going on. Obviously, I immediately upon hearing emergency assistance, that's essentially saying that they need help and they need help right now. Usually that's, well, it's always a heightened drop everything that you're doing and go. And so I immediately jumped up and started to their location. And that's when I could still hear the ongoing fight almost through my entire drive to their location.
And when you arrived at the location, what did you see?
As I was exiting my patrol car and walking up, I observed the 3 officers, Kreitz, Sedgwick, and Casper coming out the door with Mr. Baker in hand, which again led me to believe that he had not only fought 2 officers, but 3.
And what happened next?
At some point, they got Mr. Baker over to the car. He was cursing, screaming at him, very uncooperative. He was still fighting, even though he was in cuffs. He had to be forced down onto the trunk of the patrol car numerous times. He would raise his legs up, he would arch his back up. To say that he had been maced and was in absolute control would not be the case whatsoever.
I'm sorry, that he was maced and in absolute control?
Yes, to say that he was under control, I do not believe that that would be an accurate depiction. They were still basically wrestling with him to get their pat down done and then to get him in the patrol car.
So the mace certainly wasn't preventing him from continuing to be at least uncooperative and belligerent at the back of the car?
Correct.
And did you observe anything about Officers Sedgwick and Casper?
I noticed that they were gassed. I mean, they were out of breath. They were certainly breathing hard. They were very willing to give up prisoner-controlled Officer Kreitz, who seemed to be, not as fatigued as them, obviously. Officer Casper's gun belt was off, and he was struggling to put that on. But there's catches on the patrol belt that have to fit in notches, and when you're heaving, you just can't seem to do that.
By heaving, you mean trying to catch his breath?
Correct. Trying to breathe and take deep breaths.
Now, was Mr. Baker gassed?
Not whatsoever. He seemed like that he was fine. I mean, it was obvious he was uncomfortable from the mace. I could see that, he had mucus coming from his face, but I mean, he was talking more and almost nonstop. He was threatening still. He was not complying. Again, he was arching his back up. He was raising his legs up. He was not in the same physical gassed situation that the other two officers that I observed was.
Did you observe Officer Kreitz use any force against Mr. Baker there at the back of the patrol car?
I remember seeing him use some force, pushing him down, I think as many as 3 times, I'm not sure. And then I do remember the wrist lock.
Okay, and in your estimation, Officer Kreitz was leaning on that wrist lock pretty good, wasn't he?
Yes, Officer Kreitz was a former college basketball player. He's been described as, by other officers at the department, as probably the best athlete that they had ever seen or been around, and that had certainly rang true for me. He was quite a specimen.
Strong guy?
Very strong.
And did that wrist lock seem to be having any effect on Mr. Baker?
No, it did not.
And so what happens next?
At that point, it still took a while to get him in the patrol car. He did not want to get in. We almost had to resort to pulling him in from the other side of the patrol car. Officer Kreitz, I believe it was able to get him into the patrol car at that point. And that's when Sergeant Buck asked me to escort or go with Officer Kreitz to the police department.
Were you riding in the car with him?
No, I had my own patrol car. The dog was in it. Obviously, I couldn't transport, and my car wasn't close enough anyway. He happened to be in Kreitz's car. That's kind of how Kreitz got the nod to go ahead and do the transport. And then Officer Buck, or Sergeant Buck, asked me to escort them.
And what happened when you got back to the police department?
As I got to the police department in Park, I exited my car about the same time that Officer Kreitz did, and I contacted him and asked if the guy had calmed down, Mr. Baker had calmed down at all. And he said no, that he was still pretty jacked up. And at that point, that's when I offered to speak with him about it, see if I could maybe establish a little bit of rapport. Sometimes when officers contact somebody and they've been the one fighting him, or certainly when they've been the one transporting him, sometimes that rapport is damaged there, and a fresh face can sometimes help.
What did you do?
I went over him before we obviously opened the car door, and he was complaining a bit of the mace at that point and being a little belligerent. At that point, I just explained to him that I was there to help him, and that if he promised to behave and cooperate, that I would deal with the mace and hose his face off for him.
And so, did you do that?
Yes, he actually agreed that he would cooperate, and so we got him out, and I walked him over to the hose that's in the salad port area. Well, actually, it's not in the salad port area; it's in the garage area of the police department.
Did you put your hands on him to move him?
Yes, I did.
Help him walk? And what did you notice when you did that?
I noticed that he was a pretty dense, muscled-up guy. Certainly very lean. Certainly, to me, reminded me of a roofer, drywall, or somebody that had done some physical labor, construction, or whatever. And I remember the feeling of the separations of muscle, the tricep, the bicep, and how dense he was. And I felt like that he was a pretty stout individual.
At that point, in your mind, he had fought for over 2 minutes with 3 officers.
Yes, that's what was going through my mind at the time, that it was a very lengthy fight. I knew it had been a lengthy fight, and I felt it was with 3 officers, not 2.
Because you saw Brandon Kreitz come out of the house with him, yeah?
Correct, and as a matter of fact, I don't know if this has ever come up before or not, but I actually felt that it was Officer Kreitz's voice that I had heard at one point on the radio, at some point during the fight.
Yeah, because in the video, when the three of you are sitting in the booking room, you say something to Brendan like, well, I thought it was you that maced him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what we were
I
hearing.
don't know if you guys caught that or not, but I felt that Officer Kreitz was at the scene and had been part of the initial confrontation, and that Mr. Baker had put up a 2-minute defense against those three very physical fit officers.
Now, other than the musculature in his arm and that feeling of general stoutness to this guy, what else did you notice about Mr. Baker?
Was physical characteristics. That video was shot from way above. It's up actually at where the ceiling and the wall meet. So that video is not an accurate depiction. That cell does not look very long, but that bench that's next to Mr. Baker, that is a full length lay down on and still have room bench. So that camera is not very accurate. Mr. Baker was listed at 6'1", I think 185. I'm 5'10", and my uniform makes me look a little bit bigger than I am, but certainly I outweighed him, but he had longer arms, longer limbs, and from my past experience on the street, I can tell you that somebody in that 6'1", 185 range, those are the guys that are quick, agile, and can move, and they have the reach advantage on you, and they're usually the ones that if they're gonna fight, they can be a real handful to fight, just because they're coupled with the strength and the agility to do some damage.
And when you say the camera's not accurate, you're not talking about the image itself. You're saying the perspectives are a little bit off. Right?
Correct.
Okay. That this guy is not 2 feet shorter than you, and that cell is not only 6 feet long.
That's correct.
Okay. So, as you are helping Mr. Baker with the hose, did you notice he was referring to you in any particular way?
Yes, he started calling me boss almost immediately upon our contact, and in my 18 years of experience, and I've been to some classes called Street Survival, where they discuss things like that, it's pretty common knowledge that somebody calling you boss has probably done some pretty serious penitentiary time. That's not something that you would normally get from just being incarcerated for a short amount of time at, for instance, a local jail like Boone County or something like that. Normally, it's your more seasoned criminals.
And that wasn't just your personal opinion, that's something you learned in a training class.
That's correct.
Did you notice anything else that was indicative to you that Mr. Baker had spent time in prison?
I saw a few what I would categorize as prison tattoos. A prison tattoo is, normally the lines are a little blurrier, they don't have the detail or the content that a standard tattoo would have. They're usually not very bright, they're not very detailed, and they're just not a very clean looking tattoo. And that's something that we commonly refer to in law enforcement, and once again, at things like Street Survival, and you're taught to notice these things so that you can get a total picture of what you're dealing with.
And putting all of that together, what was the total picture that you got of Mr. Baker?
I saw an individual that was very muscular, of a size and build that I had had trouble controlling in the past, dealing with other people his size and build. This person, I believe, had done some pretty serious penitentiary time, so he may, and it's also my understanding that they train in prison for selling extractions and other techniques to block or to deter law enforcement. I also saw an individual have prison tattoos which backed up his language of boss and such like that, that gave me another indication that he had probably done some penitentiary time. So the overall picture that I had, coupled with the fact I believe that he had fought a very lengthy law enforcement fight with 3 very physically fit officers, is that this guy was not to be messed with and not to take him lightly, and that he was not your average bear that you were dealing with.
And he certainly had a propensity for violence, yes?
Yes, he was making threats, while he was at the scene. Certainly he had tried to get one officer's gun belt. That's never a good situation. Matter of fact, the statistics support that if somebody gets an officer's gun, that they're nearly always killed with it. So this individual, to me, if he's going after a gun belt or a gun, that is another indicator.
That's not what was in the testimony.
Well, that's his supposition. You don't really know that.
No, but it has to be a part of my totality that I look at when I'm viewing this situation. It's not happening in a vacuum. Everything that's going on, you know, they always talk in street survival or things like that. If you see somebody clenching their fists or white knuckling it, they called it, or certainly taking off your watch is an indication. And I had never seen that in law enforcement before, and the first time I saw somebody take off their watch before a fight, the guy had never said a word until he took off his watch, and that is a huge indicator that something's getting ready to go down.
Well, we understand, Kevin, all of that's his supposition. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Now, it's not that you thought this guy was Hannibal Lecter, right? I mean, it's not that you're going to chain him to a chair and stick him in a corner and forget about him, right?
No, sir. I always try to treat everybody with the amount of respect that they'll allow me to treat them. And certainly, I know Mace is an uncomfortable situation, so I wanted to give him every opportunity to calm down and clean him up and hopefully have the desired result of getting him processed without any further incident.
And so, by my count, you spent over 4 minutes washing his eyes out, helping him blow his nose, right?
That's correct?
And then Kreitz is there all this time also, right?
Yes.
And then you took Mr. Baker into the booking area at first.
Yes.
Okay, got the cuffs off, I think.
Yes.
Okay, gave him a paper towel to help him with his eyes.
Yeah, actually, the paper towel was not for him to blot his eyes. That actually makes things worse. I may not be able to elaborate on this, if so, stop me and I'll go on. But when you irrigate a situation like that, I was asking him where it was bothering him, and he would tell me behind his head, so I would run it behind his head. When at one point I told him, I said, hey, I want to do each individual eye. And I said, this is going to be very uncomfortable. I said, I'm going to hold open your eye, and I'm going to irrigate your eye out. And I did one eye and then the other. At the point that I determined that he was probably as irrigated could be, I asked him if he was done. And at one point he said no, that he needed some more water. So I certainly stayed right with it and continued to irrigate his head and wherever he would ask. And at some point I asked him again if he had had enough water and he was feeling good enough to go on with the booking process. And that's when he told me that he was done, he was ready to go. So moving on into the holding cell area, the paper towel, after you've done irrigation, the only thing that will get rid of mace is time and air, and that's it. So we certainly have decon wipes that I looked for extensively that night and could not find. I guess the department was out of them. I looked everywhere that I could think of that I had seen them before and could not find them. And they certainly help. They, in my opinion, aren't as good as water. But after that, you give somebody a paper towel and they're told to fan themselves to get that fresh air going over it, and that's how you actually dissipate mace. So the paper towel wasn't necessarily to blot his eyes. I think you can hear in the video that I tell him not to blot his eyes. That was to wave and get some fresh air on.
And he's not your prisoner, so it's not your job to actually book him, right?
That's correct. However, if you establish a rapport with somebody, it's not uncommon to let the person that is getting along best with him to go ahead with the booking procedure. So that's why, you know, at that point things were going good. I had basically taken over care of him, and so that's where we were at.
Okay. But you went ahead and put him in the holding cell, right?
Correct, that's protocol.
Okay. Because you're not ready to bring him out and actually start the booking process.
Correct. At that point, certainly, I mean, we assumed it was going to be resisting arrest, possibly assaulting an officer, and we probably could have looked up the warrants, but we don't know what all had entailed to even start the booking process and start charging them.
So you're waiting for Casper and Sedgwick to get back?
Correct.
So what happens when you put him in the holding cell? What can you see?
I'm not sure I understand exactly.
Well, we've all seen it from the video, but your eyes aren't in the video.